We did see some contentious back and forths with other members of the witness panel and Republicans. Mark Cuban largely stayed out of the crosshairs of those, contentious back and forths.
Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by Congressional reporter Samantha-Jo Roth. And SJ, we've seen a really interesting back and forth between the White House press shop, a reporter, a somewhat controversial reporter, but a reporter nonetheless. And you've written an interesting story about what this says about maybe Gen Z politics. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the White House is really leaning into this, juvenile, your mom,
Right.
Messaging. Basically, that story was that a reporter was asking a question to the White House press secretary, and she basically just replied, your mom, as did another
Whose
White House
idea
official.
was this to maybe have the summit that is now not happening at the moment, at
Exactly.
least in Budapest.
Exactly.
Your mom was the answer.
Your mom, a fair question. And she posted this exchange on X, and obviously this kind of thing is something that Gen Z, young men specifically, love seeing online. We've also seen President Trump post on Truth Social AI videos of himself, specifically this last week with the No Kings protest, where he was dumping what appeared to be potentially feces on a crowd of people protesting. So, I think you're seeing this more juvenile messaging from the White House and, from even agencies too, posting contentious exchanges with reporters. And this really does play to the base. Obviously, the Trump administration was very successful in getting young men in the 2024 election.
Right.
And they're trying to play this up again. I found in speaking with a lot of Republican strategists, some of them are, they say, Trump's a genius. I trust anything he does. Everything he touches is gold. Whereas you have other people who are saying, you're potentially turning off a huge group of the electorate, potentially those who are older. It's interesting because I also, spoke with someone else who said, the older people are not even going to see it.
Right. Right.
So, it's been an interesting messaging that they're leading into at this time.
All right. I mean, it is interesting because, Trump and the people around him have been very creative in their use of social media, new media, which was an area where Republicans during the Obama era were seen as woefully behind. But at the same time, there are all kinds of voters who don't like the way the president talks to or about people and don't like some of the sort of insults and what some people see as bullying. And so there's kind of a fine line to walk there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, one of my sources even said, the Republicans are really, back a couple of elections ago, they really dominated talk radio. Right. That was Republicans' way of communicating. And now they're embracing social media.
Which was an older demographic, generally.
Right, absolutely.
Listeners.
So now they're really leaning into this social media, TikTok, X. And, this particular source really commended, the administration for doing that. But they do have to walk a fine line, whether, some of what they're doing could turn off some voters, even some who are moderates in the middle who don't like these mean-spirited attacks. So, on one hand, you kind of you're energizing a younger base,
sure.
But you're also potentially upsetting an older one.
So Mark Cuban, since the celebrities are now very important in politics, Mark Cuban sort of waded into the center of the whole Obamacare subsidies debate. What was going on there?
Yeah, so there was a hearing, and basically this hearing was supposed to be on, getting the cost of healthcare down. Really interesting time for Mark Cuban to be testifying just a couple of days ago. He has a prescription drug company. He announced during a keynote address that they would be partnering with Trump RX. So that was a pretty big moment for them. And so on one hand, you sort of had him kissing the president's butt saying,
right.
Trump RX, it's going to be huge. It's brilliant. We're going to work with them. We're going to be transparent in the drug pricing. But then you also, on the other hand, he was asked by several Democrats who were trying to make, this hearing very much about the affordable care subsidies that have expired under the big beautiful bill, and the underlying reason why the federal government is shut down. So they try to corner him and ask what he thought about it. He tried to be diplomatic, but he did say that this is devastating for Americans. So he was trying to stay out of the way. We did see some contentious back and forths with other members of the witness panel and Republicans. Mark Cuban largely stayed out of the crosshairs of those, contentious back and forths.
So all of this is happening against the backdrop. We're still over a year out from the midterm elections, but we've got some pretty important elections coming up, and Virginia's governor's race is one of them.
Yeah, so this is an interesting race. You have Abigail Spanberger, former member of Congress, and then you have Winsome-Earl Seares, who was also in the Youngkin administration.
Lieutenant governor.
Right. It was escaping my mind.
Right, yes.
But, this has been a really interesting one. A lot, has been said about Winsome-Earl Seares' campaign. One thing that was interesting this week is she released a new ad where she sort of tried to hit back at some of Abigail Spanberger's negative ads against her. And in these ads, she even played, clips of her that, are not very, they're just not very complimentary of her, from a 2024 rally where she was, going back and forth, yelling, I'm speaking. Right. And, Abigail Spanberger has run with this clip. I mean, she has used it in like 6 to 7 ads. So, basically what she did was she used this ad to say, they try to twist my words. Not sure how effective this was. Right. But it was an interesting choice, and they're spending millions of dollars across the airwaves. The DMV area is not a cheap market to buy ads in. I mean, I'm inundated with them constantly. Yeah. So this is going to be an interesting one to watch. But I will say that Abigail Spanberger definitely has an edge when you look at the polling. She consistently is running ahead.
Yeah, and it's been a Democratic state, and Trump lost it last time around, although it was competitive.
Yeah, but you also do have Glenn Youngkin, who is a Republican and a very favorable governor, well liked. So I think there was a lot of hope that whoever would be running the Republican candidate could kind of ride his coattails. Unclear if this environment is good enough to do that.
Thank you, SJ. You can read Samantha-Jo and the rest of our political team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.